Today, we will look at how to find best order blocks. Furthermore, we will do fractal system analysis. We will discuss monthly, weekly, and hourly charts, and how to find entries under 60-minute time frames. This will be an extremely detailed trading video. Finally, you will truly understand how the price moves up and down, and secrets behind market structures. If you are ready, let's start. Welcome our free trading course, all about price action trading strategies and smart money concepts. If you love scalping and day trading or even swing trading and looking for special trading strategies, check out my free trading course. You can find the links on Google Drive or directly from my website, which is in the description. First of all, what is the best alternative for Bitcoin trading? It is the oil futures. Yes, oil is extremely volatile like Bitcoin, and oil charts have high similarities with Bitcoin. So, if you want to up your game besides Bitcoin, you can work on oil trading. Today, we are going to do something quite different. We will start analyzing the charts down to top, not top to down, with the Brent crude oil. What we do is fractal reverse engineering. Why are we gonna do this? This way, you will truly understand how the price moves. Let's start. Okay, this is the 5-minute chart. We will start from 5 minutes and keep going up and up. Notice this deepest lower low in this chart. Which significant high creates this swing low? This is the most significant movement creator. If you are confused, always look for the clearest swing highs and lows. This is where we have our market structure break. And this will be our super order block, one of the best order blocks that I love. Notice this giant and lovely imbalance that collides with the order block. Okay, where is our breaker block? Just right here. Our full breaker block. I want you to notice the quality of this break. Big green candlesticks, very fast and nice break. Powerful displacement. Furthermore, if you draw your premium and discount, you will see that price hits the EQ point. So, this is the definition of super order blocks and breaker blocks. Okay, still in the 5-minute chart, just zooming out for a bit. Where is our target? Can you tell? Notice this lovely imbalance above. But more importantly, these perfect equal highs. Check this out. It's just like hand-drawn. Perfect target in my opinion. Okay, let's work on reverse engineering. This structure and MSB are in the 5-minute chart. I can find thousands of useless market structure breaks in any chart. Why does the price react here exactly at the 74.2 price level? What is the mystery here? Okay, I moved from the 5-minute chart to the 30-minute chart now. Let's understand how the fractal systems work and why the reverse engineering is so important to understand the price. Notice this significant low in this chart, which is created by this high. We can assume the structural shift in 30 minutes with this break. Okay, do you see this imbalance? And where does the price react? Right below the imbalance, we have our super order block. Besides all of this, we also have a 30-minute super breaker block right at this point. All good. Now let's understand what is happening right at this point. We have our 30-minute structures, order block, breaker block, and the imbalance. And we have an intersection point. Now I want you to look at where the price reacts exactly. The collision point of the 30-minute structures. And price flies easily from that point. This is how real sniper traders exist in the world. We continue up and up. We started with the 5-minute chart, then we moved to the 30-minute chart. Now we are looking at the 1-hour chart. I want you to notice what I do. I keep doing the same thing over and over again. Where is the deepest lower low? Over here. So here is the confusion. We have this high which creates the deeper lower low. As you can see, the structure is different with 30 minutes and 1 hour perspective, because each time frame has its own special structure. One more time, structure swings, highs and lows are subjective matter. There is no book of rules about market structures. Now you can see this 1 hour market structure break. When you draw your Fibonacci for optimal trade entry, that 5-minute structure sits on the right top of the OTE zone. You do not have to use Fibonacci. In my opinion, premium and discount zones are more important than OTE. When the price is in the discount zone, I can start looking for other structures to take along. Now we jump to the 1-day time frame. Check this out. All of that structural analysis with 1 hour, 30 minutes, and 5 minutes is just in this little space. Trading is a funny business. Time frames are crazy. Let me do what I do one more time. Where is the deepest lower low? You can see that right at this point. Which high creates my daily lower low? Here it is. As you can see, another market structure break. So, up until now, we confirmed that 5-minute MSP, 30-minute MSP, 1 hour MSP, now 1-day MSP. Using your Fibonacci tool, you can again notice that price reacts to your optimal trade entry zone. For the daily chart, I cannot see super clear structures, but you can notice this balanced price range with a large imbalance at this point. As usual, price deepens in our discount zone before a reaction. What I do is so simple. I keep looking for more and more structures that support my idea. Now switch to the 1-week chart. Madness keeps going on. I want you to notice the break of structure that happened in 2022. Notice how the price rallied and then started to pull back into the discount zone. And in 2023, it started to consolidate, making a range. Why? Price now in discount zones. Notice this massive weekly order block zone. This is the full order block. Notice how the price keeps reacting inside this zone. Okay, let's do more crazy stuff. Opening a monthly chart. 5 minutes to 1 month. We did 3 stuff here. You may think that oil is in a bearish trend from a daily perspective. In a monthly sense, it is extremely bullish. We rallied from $20 to $130. Now making a correction. Notice this overall structure in the monthly chart. Visualize this. I am focusing on the most significant highs and lows. True MSP happens between this high and low. This is your monthly MSP. You can notice the monthly breaker block at this point. There is a high possibility price may react strongly here. The worst case is price deeply pull back into the deep discount zone until this order block before a massive reaction. Okay, you probably now have a very clear understanding of how the price moves and why multi-time frame analysis is extremely important. Okay folks, another adventure ends here. As always, all these trading methods are suitable for scalping, day trading, or even swing trading. I believe that it will be really helpful in your trading life. I hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you, please take care and see you soon.